Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by AMPLOS. Excited to be here today. Dr. Drew Brannon, Dr. Cory Shaffer. We are by trade and training performance psychologists and are grateful to work across different industries and different spaces with people and teams and organizations who are trying to become their best and fulfill their purpose and achieve big goals. So today's conversation, Cory, we are getting into the weeds on how you can lose your edge, how a person, how a team, how an organization can lose its edge, which happens, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, it does. I think it's probably useful if to start, Drew, we just, outline what we mean by an edge. So why don't you start us there? What does that really mean? What are we talking about with this edge?
What is the edge?
What is the edge? Yeah.
I think it's a bunch of things, and I know that by no means are we claiming to be the kind of authoritative source on what an edge is, but to me it comes back to when we talk about a person having an edge or a team having an edge, there is a spirit of competitiveness, of hunger, of drive, of eagerness. There's this undercurrent that is doing things inside of you that are producing behaviors and activity that's making a difference. And I think that you tend to, know it when you see it in people because there's a different type of energy about them, is probably how I would describe it. What are your thoughts on what it means to have an edge?
Yeah, I think in some ways, motivation is the word that comes to mind. I think maybe it's deeper than that. There's some different psychology to it. What I think about is, or what comes to mind, I guess, like an example is, very well documented in The Last Dance, is Michael Jordan. Like, he always played with an edge.
Agree.
And sometimes that was literally just manufactured by him.
Right.
And I think that's what he needed, again, at sort of the peak of his powers. Clearly the best player in the world and in the game, but he had to find a way to show up every night and still bring his best. And against great teams, bad teams, like against a good team, it's easy. The edge is there, right? Like, hey, we have something to prove. We want to beat them. But against a bad team or a weak opponent or whatever it might be, that's more of a challenge. And he was able to manufacture in every city he went to, and for all those years he played, this like psychological edge that he played with that was unique to him and probably ever changing and always evolving. But it really drove him in what he did. That's what I think about.
As you're describing that, I'm getting this picture in my head of people used to talk about how he would like play angry. And I don't think he was angry necessarily, but that's a little bit of what we're saying is there's this internal intrinsic drive that is just it's noteworthy. You pick up on it, you can see it. And what it translates to is a set of behaviors qualitatively and quantitatively that stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, as we're talking about this edge, this is a demeanor and disposition that drives performance. It drives performance in ways that really matter, right? And so I think that's why it's relevant to the conversation.
Well, what I think, if you just go to some basic, performance psychology principles, like the inverted U,
right,
so to speak, of sort of finding your zone. So imagine that, I guess, our listeners, there's a space for everybody where you need to have like a little bit of juice. There needs to be a little bit of adrenaline and a little something on the line, so to speak. Like, you have to know that it matters in order to bring out the best in you.
Yeah.
But whatever that is, if the scales get too big, or if there's a perceived amount of discomfort around the challenge, and I don't know if I have what it takes to handle it, we dip into, in that world, we would call like performance anxiety.
Yeah.
On the lower end of it, though, is where we're talking about, where it's almost like we're fighting complacency or boredom or something along those lines. Like, we're almost not up for the challenge or the task at hand, and we're looking for an edge to help get us there.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of what we're describing here. And so for our listeners, many of whom are probably more so in like the business world, it might be particular times of year. I know one of my observations just from working with people across industries is you think about the holidays. Essentially, after Thanksgiving, it's like
it could be a lull.
People mail it in, man.
We've done a whole podcast on that, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Like the year is over,
Yeah.
or maybe there are those times around the summer when kids start getting out of school, and our priorities now start shifting to like the next vacation we're taking and that kind of thing. Again, I think every industry is probably different, but I think we're all susceptible to fall into these periods where we can get lulled into a sense of complacency, and we lose the edge that makes us really good.
Right. Yeah, and so we're talking about this let's a couple last things here before we jump into the conversation fully. Why is this relevant? Why does this matter? Because people that want to be successful are competing in spaces that are hard. Like it's not easy to be successful in business these days. I don't care what industry you're in. It's not easy to be successful in sports. And so we know that those that are operating with an edge have an advantage. They have an advantage. They've learned how to harness it. They've learned how to leverage it for the good. And it's making a difference when it comes to outcomes. Because you've heard us talk a lot on the podcast about the key of building the right process, having the right blueprint to go be successful. We really believe that this idea of having an edge and maintaining it is a formula, or a part of the formula that we want to really challenge people to have.
Yeah, I think just one more example that probably resonates with a lot of our listeners. I think you're really susceptible to this. You're probably most susceptible to this, and this goes back to the Jordan thing too. When things are going really well,
yeah,
that's when you're most likely to experience the loss of this edge, the motivation, the chip on your shoulder, however you want to describe it. That's probably when you're most likely to experience it, is when things are going good in some capacity. Maybe they have for a little while. So
that's right. And that's where we're going today. So that's a good segue, Cory, of we're going to hit on 5 factors that we have seen contribute to people's teams and organizations losing their edge. So the trend you just said of whatever you want to call it, whatever language you want to choose, of maybe easing off the gas pedal a little bit, slowing down. What are 5 things that we have seen be factors to cause people to lose their edge? So let's jump into it, my man. What you got for us, number 1?
Yeah, number 1, we're going to go with you don't plan like you used to, and instead maybe you have more of a, we'll be fine mentality. We'll figure it out as we go. A little bit more of a, hey, we'll just wing it mindset.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, the first thing I think about, because the whole word plan, the whole notions of planning, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make there is they think of the word plan as like a binary construct, essentially a construct of like, did you or did you not? And that is not at all how planning works, because you can plan very poorly. You can plan and not account for a bunch of the things that you should have. You can spend just a few minutes. So you can answer that question in the affirmative and yet not at all have gone through the process that you really should have. And so I think most people are doing some type of planning. I think the point of what we're saying here is people who have an edge and are hungry and driven and committed to achieving, they're planning well. Like they're getting ahead on that. They're asking the relevant questions. They're gathering the right information. They're putting in the time away from the lights, away from the actual meeting itself, whatever it is, depending on your industry. Like they're laying the foundation to give themselves a greater likelihood for success, which is all we ever have. And we've talked about this many, many times on the Growth Project. We don't ultimately control outcomes. Therefore, we absolutely want to be sure and need to be sure we are controlling the process that we're running. So I think what can happen, and to your point, Cory, of when we begin to, for lack of a better term, slack a little bit on the planning phase, less than desirable outcomes often follow that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's easier for me oftentimes to start in sports and try to bring it back to other industries, but this would be the equivalent of, we stopped doing our own self-scout for one.
Yeah.
We stopped scouting the opponent.
Hey, we know these guys already.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or again, we stopped the self-scout. It's just like, well, we know who we are, right? We know what we do. We're just going to keep running the same play, like that sort of a mindset. Any of those little things, I think, in the sports world too, this might be where, let's say, at the athletes themselves, their process changes and shifts, and maybe it changes. Like, hey, I don't need to do that. Like, I'll be fine.
Yep.
Right. Weaker opponent. I'm only going to play the first half. So who needs to do A, B, and C?
Right.
Physically, mentally, it doesn't matter. So again, the process changes usually in a bad way. It becomes more of a check the box as opposed to let's really be intentional and really be deliberate with what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Yep.
It's probably the best observation that I've had. And that, I think that, again, that goes across industries. I think, to your point, I think people will lull themselves because on the surface, it looks as if they're going through the same process. Mm-hmm. Like on paper, everything is the same.
They're not canceling meetings and that type
Correct.
of thing.
But what is different is the intent that's behind it, the focus that's behind it, the mindset, all of that is missing. And so it really does become like, I'm going through the motion of my plan or my process, but without the right intent, without the right deliberate nature, it's going to produce a very, very different result.
Sometimes this can happen, and this relates to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, in the process or due to success. And what I mean by that specifically would be, as people experience success in business, if we focus on that for a second, well, what does that mean every time? And that there's more to do. There are more minutes in your day that are accounted for as a result of the success. More meetings, more phone calls, whatever, more fulfillment of the work, whatever it might be, which, very well could leave less time for preparation, planning. And so the irony there, of course, is some of the very things that have created the opportunity for the success are the things that we begin to neglect. Mm-hmm. And we begin to take for granted. And suddenly, although we think our formula is what it was, it isn't, because we're not preparing like we used to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if there's a quote anecdote for this, one of my suggestions would be and this is why I'm always very, very intentional with people, teams, organizations, individual clients that I work with, is when things are going well, when you feel like you do have the edge, it's important to capture and have clarity around what is the process and what is the plan when I'm going good. And to know that like the back of your hand. And that then is what I'm following. But that's not just, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's also what's the mindset like?
Yeah.
What's my focus like?
Right.
When I'm really, really engaged and immersed in my plan like I should be. The better you understand that, the better you can replicate that. Right. I think, again, that's part of the reason why what goes, the processes will often remain, but it's the mindset, it's the focus, all those things that end up, you end up abandoning because you weren't clear on those were important parts of the equation to begin with.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. Yeah. Okay. So as we transition from there, don't neglect the planning, the preparation. I always go back to that term I used a minute ago of laying the foundation. Lay the foundation needed to put you in a position to increase the likelihood of success. That's so much of what we believe in and what we do. All right, let's go to the second one here. So again, on this topic of how to lose your edge, the second one we want to talk through is you allow bad apples to stick around and value their talent over your culture. Bad apples.
So first of all, there's truth to that. I learned this. I forget which book it's in, but the saying one bad apple can ruin a whole bushel is true. when apples start to rot, they release a particular pheromone or something, and it almost triggers that process in the other apples, the other pieces of fruit around it. So that saying.
So that's a saying that actually came from somewhere.
It actually came from somewhere. Yeah, it's true, and that's the point. So if you let those people in your organization stick around, it's like they're releasing the same toxic like pheromones to the people around you.
Interesting,
and it'll have impact.
So let's get into this one a little bit. And what we're talking about is this coexistence, and this happens in so many instances when talent, and we'll kind of even caveat it this way, we have an uber talented person, like he or she is really, really good, has some unique ability. However, he or she is also a bad apple, meaning problematic on the team when it comes to chemistry. There's some cultural things that we know are deteriorating as a result of this person's way of doing things. But man, that they sure are good at what they do. Talk a little bit, Cory, about that dynamic and why those people sometimes get to stay a really long time.
Man, yeah, there's probably a lot of reasons. Again, I think ultimately it just comes back to what they're often able to produce.
Yeah,
is pretty darn good, right? The scoreboard, like they show up, they're going to score points or whatever it is, and that's, I mean, if that's how we're framing the question, that's why they stick around.
Yeah, 100%.
Because they're going to produce in whatever capacity or the industry that you're in. They're going to produce. I think it's pretty simple from that standpoint. I think too, a lot of it will depend on the size of your team. Just as one factor that I think the larger the team and the better your culture, the easier it is to absorb somebody like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Because at some point, the belief at least needs to be that like, hey, our culture can absorb that. And if anything, we're all swimming in the same direction. Like it's only a matter of time before this person sort of follows suit and, probably starts to fall into place in terms of what we believe in and how we want to operate and so on.
Or they might leave.
Sure. But if you got a small team and you get one bad apple, the impact can be pretty severe. Because there obviously are just fewer people, fewer opportunities almost of like that corruption to occur. So the probability starts going up that if they even just impact one other person, that's potentially huge on a small team.
Yep. No, I think that's a great point. I'm glad that's where I wanted to go a little bit too, is when this comes up, like in our work, and this question comes up from leaders, decision makers, what you're touching on is one of the first questions I always ask. And that, well, how big is the team? How big is the team? And how do they function when it comes to a performance standpoint? Like who's doing what? Because size of the team is a critical variable. You and I both work heavily in college football. You've got 120 something guys on the team. You are not going to find a college football team this day and age that doesn't have bad apples. That doesn't exist. But when you have 120 something guys, if your culture is strong, you can weather that storm. And I've seen that happen, and you've seen that happen. That's an entirely different world than, let's just talk about, a normal size commercial sales team that's selling med devices or pharmaceuticals, whatever. You're probably talking about a team of 8 to 12. That's very different. When you have 10 people on your team and we have this uber talented person who is just difficult, that team could easily lose its edge very, very quickly because people are just so annoyed by this individual. And they're questioning the leader, and they feel like the leader is valuing results over their culture, over their happiness, over their well-being. They begin to get disengaged, apathetic, resentful. The snowball can roll down the hill really quickly.
Mm-hmm. And then the saying, of course, like misery loves company, to throw out another just, simple phrase.
You're really bringing it home on the
right.
language.
I mean, it's truth though. So to your point, and again, there are a lot of questions and a lot of different variables depending on your specific team and whatever that you have to consider. But even I guess your question or your point there of like, all right, are all these people in the same office every day, or are they remote or hybrid or some capacity? That's a big variable
for sure.
If they're in the same space every day, I'm pretty worried about my bad apple.
You should be,
because the amount of interaction they're getting with the people around them is really, really high. If we're all remote, probably less, or again, like there's a much longer runway to work with there in terms of like, it's just going to take a long time for them to potentially have really bad impact on your team because the touch points aren't there for them to have that much impact. Potentially. So
it could.
These are just, variables that I'm throwing out that may influence this, but it doesn't take away from like, the point is here, the longer you let them hang around, it's going to influence your ability to have that edge.
Yeah. And let's just one more point I want to make on this one before we switch gears. Let's get real concrete with this. And what I mean by that is like the psychology of the team member, because here's how this can easily go is someone on the team, probably more than one person on the team, is waking up every day. And as he or she is getting into their day-to-day demands, challenges, whatever it is, there's a voice in their head that is bothered by this. Like they're unhappy about the fact that someone continues to be on the team who is selfish, who only cares about his or her production, who doesn't mind being negative, tearing people down, blaming, excuse making. And because that person is in their own mind and bothered about this, you are getting less of them to showing up to the table. Mm-hmm. Like 100% confirmation on this. You are getting less of them. Let's get some numbers to it just for the sake of conversation. Let's say we're getting 80% of that person. Well, let's imagine we've got a team of 10. And this isn't the only person that feels that way. Let's extrapolate that out over the course of our team of 10. Think about the reduction in performance that's happening on that team. If across my team of 10, I'm getting 80% out of people day in and day out. Mm-hmm. You know what the cost of that is going to be economically over the course of a year? I don't care how many points that bad apple's putting on the board. Like this is something that we need to think about.
Yeah. What do you do here
with the bad apple?
Mm-hmm.
The bushel. You're the expert on the bushel.
Hey, I'm just giving you some Farmer's Almanac knowledge.
So you're going to let me take a swing at this one. Well, I think you do one of two things, and you kind of hit it earlier, is you, as the leader, you must take deliberate steps on a reasonable timeline to get this person to move in one of two directions. I think you've got to uphold the standard that you believe in and want to see on your team so that this person either buys in or goes elsewhere. And that doesn't need to happen over the course of 2 weeks or 2 months necessarily. I wouldn't suggest trying to do a timeline like that, but you got to be moving in a direction. What I've seen team members get really frustrated about is when they don't think that's happening and when the leader is basically just existing in a holding pattern and kind of like naively hoping something's going to get better. You can't do that.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to number 3. You go proud of yourself, and ultimately that's what's forcing you to lose the edge or lose the chip on your shoulder. So you grow proud. Along with that, you probably start developing a little bit of an ego.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a fixed mindset that's starting to take root, and you sort of lose sight of the planning, the processing, the systems in place, the hard work, whatever it is that's really driving your success to begin with. And you start thinking that it's, some unique characteristic that you have. You're somehow special, or this is indicative of how talented I am or we are, or whatever it might be. The point is here that this pride is probably forcing you to a place of complacency.
Yeah. Happens a bunch.
Yes.
And, I remember neither you nor I are Alabama football people. And it feels a little strange to now say this, that former Alabama coach Nick Saban, doesn't that sound strange?
That's strange.
But I don't know when he said it, but I know he said it at one point during kind of some of their peak years, which many of them feel like peak years. He said, that the greatest threat to Alabama is Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he was talking about, that there was in the earlier phases of kind of the way the years of him putting that program on a pedestal like it was, and I guess I should say is, like there was an edge. And he did a masterful, incredible job of sustaining that and maintaining it for a really long time. But that's what he meant when he said that, is like the more sign or hardware that gets hung on the walls and the more numbers that go up in terms of documenting years of championships, the easier it becomes to do what you just said, which is to develop that mentality of like, man, we're special. Like we're unique. Nobody does it like we do it. We have an advantage. Look at us.
And I believe that's also probably around the time he coined the phrase rat poison. Right?
Do you want to expand on that?
Well, he would always reference like, being sort of gassed up in the media or in the polls and, all of the pundits talking about how great they are. He would describe that as like rat poison, like don't take the bait. Mm-hmm. Don't believe that. Always believe essentially that like there's work to be done and we're not perfect. We still got to go out and play well and execute and get better and so on.
Yep. And that okay, so how do you do, I know we're kind of jumping to how do you do that, but my mind just, while we're talking about Saban, I just so believe in this, that when you have a leader who just genuinely enjoys, and this is going to sound like much of a cliche, but genuinely enjoys the process needed to drive success, you are so much less vulnerable to what we're talking about, because you're talking about a guy who, we had a former member of our team who played for Saban. Like the things you've heard about how he eats the same thing for breakfast every day, eats the same thing for lunch every day, like shows up to work, like it's all true. He really enjoyed his job. Like he wasn't doing anything differently following a win than he did following a lot. Like he just loved it. When you have people in charge who work that way with great consistency, your vulnerability to this doesn't go away, but is greatly reduced.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, again, what can you do here? I think obviously what we're looking for is a better balance between confidence, which is essential to be a high performer in anything, but a balance between confidence and humility. Like we're looking for a good midpoint between those two things to keep both of those in balance, I think is really important.
Yep.
Confidence, you get too much of it. If it's not rooted in humility, that's again, it just becomes arrogance and ego and so on. But we also just don't want to be full of so much humility that we don't recognize our strengths and what makes us good.
Sure.
Right. So first and foremost, it's that. Again, I'll go back to what I described earlier, having clarity around our plan, our processes, like understanding that those contribute to and are massive parts of what make us good. We have to understand and have clarity around that stuff. I think just in general, if you want to stick to some growth mindset principles, just that, right? Like there is no finish line. We're always trying to get better. We're always trying to improve.
Yeah.
We will continue to need to do that and evolve over time. To steal a phrase from like New Zealand All Blacks and stuff that we've studied and taught for years, when you're on top of your game, change your game. At least be mindful enough to ask the question, what can we be doing different? What can we be getting better at? Because the stuff that got you there are not going to be the things that take you to the next level or that even necessarily sustain where you're at.
Yeah.
So to a degree, it's an essential, it's a necessity to continue to look for ways to get better.
And I can even just share a personal example. The Coach Saban stuff, those aren't personal examples. I've never been in that building. I've spent a lot of days in the building, University of Georgia football, and just having fortunately won a couple of the last few years, I can tell you, like, there's nothing different with how the way Kirby Smart goes about his same. Nothing's changed. The intensity, the focus, the purpose, the clarity, you would never know. And even the days after each of our championships, as we're just kind of back to work doing the deal. And of course people are happy, of course they're grateful, but like it's just same deal.
Yeah, I'll give a shout here to somebody who's been on the podcast, a friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod.
How about that? A part of the AMPLOS family, but Spencer Strider.
Great example.
Leads Major League Baseball in strikeouts in 2023, but comes back in 2024, and everybody's shocked to see that he's throwing a curveball, a nasty curveball at that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right. So the point is, he was really good in 2023, but didn't get too proud of himself that he didn't still try to find a way to get better. Now, is he going to be able to just add a new pitch to his arsenal every year? No. But the point was, there's enough humility in there to go, hey, I think I can be better. I wonder what that would look like, and let's explore some options. So,
when's the knuckler coming?
I don't know if that's ever coming, but we'll see what that produces in 24. I don't know. He certainly doesn't know, but he believes in it, and so it's coming from the right place.
You just got to get his mental game intact.
That's right.
Okay, let's go to number 4 here. So we're on 4 of 5 for those of you keeping score at home. Number 4, you stop investing in people and the team and their growth because you're too busy. Hey, we used to have time for that. Business is booming. We got a lot going on. Just don't have time anymore. How does that contribute to losing your edge?
To a big degree, I think it's indicative of priorities.
Yeah.
And with what you're saying, it's you're now, and you can chime in on this. I might butcher how to phrase this, but the point is, like, you're putting just revenue and the fact that things are going really good over the long-term growth, health, development of your team.
Right.
And I'm not saying that chasing revenue is bad. I know, everybody's in a performance-based industry, and that's the goal, right, is revenue. But if that comes at the expense of something important like this, it's a problem.
Yeah, and I would say this, what we call work surges, those are real. Those are very real. And so is it likely that you have had and will continue to have periods of time, and I don't, different industries define those different ways. A period of time could mean a week, it could mean a month, it could mean 4 months, whatever. But are you going to have periods of time where work surges are occurring where, it is just chaos? Like we have so much going on. This is a really, really intense kind of concentrated period of time for us where maybe we can't do much of this. Understand, that happens. Is that going to be a sustainable winning model for the health and longevity of an organization? No, it's not. And that's what you're saying. It's the difference between, here's where we'll kind of blend sports and business. The way you would go about your business and make decisions and navigate, if your goal was to have a great season, hey, let's have a great year. That is a very different method than you would want to put in place if your goal is to build a great program or build a great organization. Because you can find a way through pulling on levers X, Y, and Z to increase the likelihood of you have a great season or have a great year. However, you might be in a worse position than when you started in terms of building a great program or building a great organization.
Yeah, again, I think this masks itself as we clearly have an edge, right? We're going and getting it. We're so busy that we can't even.
Great point.
We can't even make time for this. That's our edge. Look at it. But the problem is, again, the point is that that confidence that hey, this is our edge it's just not sustainable long term.
No.
To your point, right? So it's masking itself in one way, but in reality, what you're doing is probably over the long haul, if that never really slows down, if the surge just becomes no, this is just what we do now, we're always just going out and getting it.
Yeah.
Again, I think this is where people start going man, this is it then, huh?
Yeah.
Right? This is how it is around here all the time. And you're just pushing them, nudging them closer and closer to burnout. And at some point, I think they start looking up and going man, it feels like I can probably go somewhere and get, invested in by my leadership or whatever it is, still work hard, but have a better balance.
Right. Which, go look at the data. It's very, very clear. Generationally speaking, more and more generations are entering the workforce. Obviously, the millennials are a huge part of the workforce. Gen Z coming next. They care about this stuff. They will take less money, work for less money, in order to be at a place that values them and their growth and their development.
Yep.
Okay, fourth quarter here. Last one, Corey. Number 5.
You overcommit to things that don't actually move the needle in your business. What do you got on that, Dr. Brannon?
Overcommitting to things that don't move the needle in the business. And how does that contribute to losing your edge? Well, I did a thing recently with a company, and we were talking about really the focus of this part of the talk was a prioritization, although we weren't using that term. And I just did this simple thing where I said, okay, who in the room would say that time is more valuable than money? And unsurprisingly, everybody in the room raised their hand. And I said, okay, cool. And then I said, who in the room could sit here and honestly say today that you spend your time as judiciously as you spend your money? Nobody's hand went up. And I'm like, help me understand that. Like, everybody in this room just said that time is more precious, more valuable than money, but no one's thinking about their time like they're thinking about their money. And it's the same kind of thing here is, for whatever reason, whether it's busyness or inability to set boundaries or, there's a bunch of different possibilities of why we give away time too freely. It's easy to find yourself in a scenario where you're allocating lots of time to things that really aren't doing a whole lot for the things that you value in your company or organization, whatever, the metrics that matter to you, whatever those might be. It's easy to get there.
Yeah, I think this can contribute to losing your edge and also be a product of losing your edge.
Both, agree.
I feel like at this point, in a lot of ways, if you're starting to overcommit to things that don't actually move the needle in your business, it might be indicative of you've already lost some of your edge.
Yeah.
Because your eye's not on the ball anymore.
Right.
You've lost some of your focus. So that was just my initial reaction to this. This could happen because there's boredom that sets in. There's pretty well documented research that there's actually a research article that's entitled "The Mundanity of Excellence."
Yeah, I love that.
Right in the world of sports, and so just the day-to-day, the monotony of it, the routine nature of it. If you let that get under, think about how you describe Saban. Eats the same thing every day, does the same thing every day, like the same thing on repeat, just year after year. Like that's what he's doing. Right? Yep. But that's not for everybody in terms of not everybody's wired or enjoys the mundanity of what it takes to be really good.
Not everybody likes oatmeal cream pies either.
Yeah, exactly. Those are fantastic.
Which are his breakfast of choice, apparently.
Great. But my point is, maybe there's some of that's setting in, right? So like I'm bored and I'm just looking for some novelty.
Yeah.
I just want to switch it up and do something different, and like boom, like that. You're not focused.
Yeah.
You lost a little bit of your edge. Like part of what made you good to begin with was the narrow focus, the depth with which you attacked everything that you did. It wasn't about this is fun or anything like that necessarily, but yeah, so that to me is maybe a part of this, right? You're getting bored. You don't like the monotony of things. And so you just start looking for other things to do when they might not be the best.
Which all of what you just said is a real problem.
Yeah.
Because I think about one of my kids not too long ago. We were kind of doing the end of the day little, debrief, however you do that with your kids. And one of my kids made the comment of, she said, Dad, it was just kind of like a normal Tuesday. And like and said it in a way of just like ho-hum, boring. And I said back to her, I was like, honey, I got news for you. There are a whole lot of normal Tuesdays to come in life. Like much of life is normal Tuesdays.
Yeah.
To your point, right? Like the mundanity of it. And so like, if you're not okay with that, that's a problem.
Yeah. I think, if there's maybe another reason for this, it's just the lack of clarity on your vision. Lack of clarity. I guess a lot of things. Lack of clarity on even just what does drive, revenue, or what is moving the needle and what isn't, and so on. And so you just start, throwing stuff at a wall to see what'll stick.
Yeah.
Again, all of this to a degree, it just takes all of this highlights to me, the losing your edge is you're probably going to lose your edge when you stop paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
And reflecting on what we're doing and why are we doing it, and what do our processes look like and how could they be better? Like The second you stop asking those questions and doing some introspection, some self-reflection, you're probably going to lose your edge.
Because remember, we're talking about lack of focus to some degree here. Although you aren't focused, perhaps, and someone is. So someone out there is focused. So some competitor, someone else who does what you do, is not losing their edge, is not spending minutes on things that don't move the needle. So it's critical that you are. All right, so I know we need to wrap up here. Cory, just any final thoughts from you as we cap off this kind of conversation about losing your edge and the fact that we've seen this happen to a whole bunch of people, which is why we're talking about it.
Yeah, I think what I just wrapped up with on that last point is probably my take home is this is all the more reason why it's so important. It's essential to get into a regular cadence of doing the self-scout. Again, my theory behind that is imagine you do this monthly as opposed to just annually or never. Well, I'm never going to go more than a couple of weeks without straying off track. But because on the first of the month, every month, I know I'm going to take a step back and just see the bigger picture and understand where we are and how we've been doing things and how I've been showing up every day or whatever, I'm that much more likely to acknowledge when I've gotten off track, and I can that much more quickly get back on track.
Yeah.
I can get back to, hey, I lost my edge. Let's get back to that.
Yeah.
So if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, that's probably the biggest reason you're going to lose your edge. And so to me, a lot of it always comes back to, and I know I'm biased because I love this stuff, but a lot of it can come back to regular reflection is probably something that's really helpful in terms of combating this.
Yep. Yeah, and I would just end with this. I want to be sure that we're framing this whole idea the right way of everybody loses their edge sometimes. And so this is not a criticism or an indictment and any of those things. You know, what we left out today and didn't really get into is it is completely normal and understandable. Sometimes you lose your edge because life is happening to you. You're becoming a parent. You're having some personal things going on. You're having some things with your loved ones. Like all of those things contribute to us shifting and not really approaching our thing with the same type of tenacity. We understand all of that. So although we're talking about this as kind of a negative, like don't do this, don't let yourself do that stuff, we absolutely realize like these things are going to happen. Our purpose in this conversation is to help you identify it, as you said, Cory, and then have some ideas of what to do if that's you. So thank you to our listeners. Always, we're just grateful for the people that are tuning in and spending time with us. We hope this conversation has been one that you can put immediately into practice in your life as you seek to go pursue better. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.